All right, welcome everyone to our second Deeper Learning Details session. We're super excited to be joined by Tony Donen of STEM Chattanooga, a school that we got to see about a year and a half, 2 years ago before the pandemic. And tonight we're going to dive deep on leadership of project-based learning and all the different variations within a school that was completely built around that concept. Before we get into that though, let's get some formalities out of the way. So Jason, would you do us the honor?
You bet. Well, welcome, Tony. Thanks for joining us. Do you assent to having this recorded and for us for using the transcripts for research purposes? Probably another article, book?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. And for those of you new, Tony's been highlighted in our book out here, Leadership for Deeper Learning. So you can read more about his story there.
All right, awesome. And so let me give a little bit of an introduction then before we sort of get into formal questions. So Tony can tell more of the story of STEM School Chattanooga. He is the principal, the founding principal of STEM School Chattanooga. In fact, the whole founding, as I was looking back through my notes of our various interviews, founding happened in July, start August, something crazy like that.
That's right. You know, we had a quality 6 weeks before we opened the school.
Yeah. So
would you recommend that as the ramp up time, the max ramp up time?
I would maybe 7 or more might be good, but yeah, 6 might be doable. All right.
So this really interesting, fun challenge to build a school from scratch, but on a very rapid timeline. The STEM School Chattanooga, now there's a picture of some new facilities behind him, but it is attached to a community college in Chattanooga, and it has mostly high school. We've not expanded into middle school at all, right?
No, still high school. Yep,
right.
Still high school.
And it serves a variety. It does a variety of things well. We might hint at a few of those tonight, but from the beginning, it was meant to be a STEM school structured deeply around project-based learning. And we'll maybe retell the story of you having to do some quick research on that topic. Okay. Around how do we sort of make PBL the core of most or all of what we do. And so how that story develops is where we want to jump in tonight. Tony has been a principal at other schools as well, and so has leadership experience in a variety of contexts. And so this is sort of the latest challenge, and you might reflect more on the different leadership challenges in that different context. So here's though the thing. I want to share screen for just a second and give you, as we went and did our school visits, we always try to grab some photos of things that stood out to us. And so I tried to realign them. My photo size is not perfect there. But right as you walk into STEM Chattanooga, there's a lot of stuff right up front, actually. And there's other photos we have too. There's the mission statement is right literally as you walk into the door. And so you're really struck by that. But before you see any classrooms, you see this wall of PBL units. And so all of the projects that are going on in the building in a given year are on display. And so, we immediately got a sense of how in-depth the effort in project-based learning was from that wall, right? And that really set the tone for the rest of the visit for us. And so as we thought about, hey, when we want to wrap back around and see what stories do we want to dive into a little bit more deeply, I think this is a story, that image really almost is an image I want to dive into more deeply of, how do you lead a school this far on project-based learning where you're comfortable putting all the projects literally on the wall for everyone to see right as they walk in the front door. Let me also, while I'm sharing, okay, you saw a new one come across there. On their website, STEM School Chattanooga's website, they're great about sharing resources. Okay, so the About Us, look at all the great stuff that's going on here. I'm sure you're interested in their dress code, but as you scroll down here, the PBL curriculum units and their broader approaches to PBL are sort of a statement here. What I really want to feature is to see the PBL curriculum units, click here. And we'll provide these links. And so we can even provide them in chat right now if you want to dive in and take a look at a couple of them. But here are 2021 PBL units that were being used. And so you can jump right in and see a bunch of the pacing guides and all of that stuff that was showing up on the wall is what is there. And you can dive into more deeply in those files. Okay, so you're doing a great job making it all public. And I know actually the leadership types in the What School Could Be community, like this level of detail, they're into it. And so I wanted to sort of put all of that out there as we sort of dive into some questions around PBL, just to help show our own audience, like just how in-depth this work has become at STEM Chattanooga. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I hope that, did I get anything wrong in that quick introduction, Tony?
You did great. You did great. 14 errors, but besides that, awesome.
Superb. I appreciate that. Is okay. But I mean, the transparency is wonderful. Like,
yep.
It's transparent as you walk through the door, and it's transparent on the website. I mean, we very much appreciate all of your efforts on that front.
Yeah, that was a goal since the beginning, right? Is not only to do things well, but to do things at a level that we can make public and share with others. So you talked about the mission statement on the wall, right? It's to create and share a new paradigm of world-class learning. So it wasn't just to do it for us, but what can we do to actually help others in their ventures as well? So yeah, tons of stuff on the website. And if you like reading PBL stuff, there is more than enough to get you to bed. So.
Well, Tony, let's go on and start painting a picture for our listeners here. Talk to us about your efforts with PBL. Like, how did it start? What was the impetus to that? And what does that look like and feel like in the school, if you will?
Yeah, so going back a little bit to what Justin said, the school in 2012, local area got a grant to start a school. So they got approved in March 2012. I got hired on and started July 1. And they're like, hey, the school's going to open on August 12th. And so we had literally 6 weeks to like go hire people and everything. But I can remember the night before my first day on the job, they said, hey, first thing is you're going to meet with 13 of these people at central office, curriculum people, assistant superintendents, all these people. And I was like, all right. And I remember them like in the interview process talking about PBL. And I was like, I should probably look that up on the internet, right? So I looked it up on the internet. I saw project-based learning and problem-based learning. And I was like, man, I didn't even know there were two different kinds of PBLs. So I remember going into that meeting and we began asking me a bunch of questions like, what are you going to do? Blah, blah. I was like, kind of the first day, but here are some ideas. And then they said, you have any questions? I said, yeah, I got a question. I said, when you were talking about PBL, were you talking about project-based learning or problem-based learning? And it went dead silent. And literally silent for about 15, 20 seconds. If you count 15, 20 seconds, that's a long time. And the assistant superintendent looked down and he said, yeah, that. And at that point, I realized after one internet search the night before, I was the most knowledgeable person in the room about PBL at that point in our district. So that's the start, right? So we had 6 weeks we did a bunch of internet searches, found stuff from like Buck Institute, found some other things, and we began just trying to piece together what it even was. So that was kind of the start. Like we had no idea, and we were like, we need to implement this. What are we going to do? And I remember getting with the first group of teachers, and we just collectively decided, hey, we're gonna try this, and we're gonna do an interdisciplinary unit. We're gonna try one, and we sat down for one day, and we started with what would be a good question. And I can remember for 30 minutes went back and forth, and eventually somebody came up with, how do you prevent emerging strains of viruses? And everybody, like by the time we got to the end of that 30 minutes, people were like, yeah, that's really good. And the virus could be a cold, or it could be a computer virus. And we're like, awesome. So the kids could do like all sorts of different virus stuff with it. And so that was kind of our first step, just coming up with a question. And then after we came up with a question, just from our small searches, we were like, we have to be able to figure out how we're going to connect this to content. So everybody sort of got in their content groups and began going, I wonder what math we could do with this. I wonder what science we could do with this. And once we got the content, like, okay, I think I could do this, this, and this. Then we were like, all right, well, what would it look like for them to show you that content with this question? And that was probably the rest of the day, just trying to figure out what a product might look like. And that's where we started. That was the base. It was basically a bunch of people together that all knew nothing. And that's how we started.
So who's in the room with you at that point? It's you, you've got some content teachers. I mean, you're a startup school, so it's not like there are 30 some teachers in the building. It's probably a small group.
It was like 10 of us.
Okay.
Like 10 of us in a room. We got math, science, social studies, art, language arts. I think those were the 5 content areas that we decided we were going to try to connect. Yeah. And at that point, I think the product that we came up with was some sort of presentation that included pieces from every content area for the product.
So, I mean, it was amazing to be interdisciplinary from the start. That's one of, I think, the hard parts is getting teachers to cross those boundaries. So the fact that you were crossing boundaries from the beginning was, I think, fortuitous that you didn't have to unpack those boundaries.
Yeah, we were lucky in the sense we were all coming in it together at the, having this collective experience and knowing nothing together, right? So there wasn't any expert in the room, right? Whereas as we have since then, it's 9 years later, we have developed our own PBL training. We've trained probably over 1,000 different educators. We know all sorts of things, kind of where to start. In fact, when we start people in PBL now, we don't start from that standpoint. We start with something called a SOL, a self-organized learning environment. And SOL is something that you can do in one classroom setting, which helps you develop the type of environment that you need to have in a classroom to make PBLs really productive, right? Kids are used to sitting and listening and regurgitating. And so they actually have to go through their own training of what does it mean to be freed up, to be asked a big question, and for me to go out and research and try and find answers, right? Without the teacher just saying, here's the answer, right? So now that we've learned that it took us about 3 years to go through an entire process of getting to the point of really understanding how to do it well and really understanding where to start people, right? Because not everybody is going to be in the situation I was in where you're at 6 weeks and go. A lot of schools now that are startups come to me and they have 1.5 years to plan, right? And so I'm like, oh, you've got a lot more time to be able to really amp up and train people well. And then there's other people that are like, I'm at a school that's been around for 50 years and I've got like 3 teachers that want to start doing PBL. Where should we start, right? And how do we build it in that kind of school environment? So we even talked to them about, okay, how do you build capacity from nothing when you're in a very traditional setting? So we've learned a lot of different avenues to go about it, but our start was definitely unique.
For sure. And so I think what we're super curious about is some of the leadership stuff that's happening in those early days. How much are you relying on external models versus building your own unique model? I mean, I'm sure you were doing those internet searches, got a bit of training, I think, from the Buck Institute. And so there's definitely some roots there, but were there other clear models that you were following early, or was it really all just learning by doing yourself?
Gotcha. So as we, that commercial with the they're flying the plane and they're building the plane at the same time, right? That old commercial. I can't remember what it was for, but that was kind of the situation we were in. We were in this, like, we're going to try and do this, but at the same time we're trying to do this, we realized how much we don't know. So it was like, all right, so we sent 2 folks to Buck Institute training, right? We sent 3 people to Think Forward training. And that was done, there's New Tech Highs, a network throughout the country, right? And so the Think Forward was something from Maine or New Tech, was one of the original New Tech Highs had put forward PBL training. We had some visits to some schools in Ohio. Ohio had started something called the OSLN, Ohio STEM Learning Network. They were the original STEM learning network in the country that Battelle funded. The second state that Battelle funded for a STEM learning network was Tennessee. But we went to Ohio and visited about 4 different schools to kind of see how they were implementing this idea. And so from all that, that all happened the first year, and we began to piece together, okay, how do we want to take these things, not just go what Buck has and just copy and paste it, even though it's great stuff. We had to make it fit our schema, right? You got to make it yours, because that's the leadership part of it. You want the people in your building to feel like they are part of creating something and that they own that work, as opposed to you hand over a template and they just go, all right, you just gave me a template and now you just want me to follow the template. That's not why most people get into teaching. Most people get into teaching to connect with kids, create things, to create experiences, so that building ownership with them. So it was sort of like learning what other people did, but then building our own. So when we went into the second year, we decided, hey, we have a really bad unit plan model. Like our unit plan model, if somebody came and said, hey, not like the ones you saw on the wall, if somebody had come that first year and said, hey, show me the unit plan, we all would have been like embarrassed. We would have been like, please don't make us show you the unit plan that we're using. Like, it's not worthy to share. So we decided, going in the second year, our goal by the end of the second year was to have unit plans that we wouldn't be embarrassed. It wasn't even having unit plans that would be amazing. It would be unit plans that would not embarrass us when we shared them with other people. And so we spent the second year stealing, copying. We found a school, Innovation Academy, that was in Kingsport, Tennessee. That was a middle school that had a really good template for PBL unit plans. And so we took theirs and some other pieces and we created our own. And then as a staff, we actually looked through these things. Some folks had more work on it than others. But then we literally voted, and collectively, as we ended that second year, like, this is the plan that we're going to use. We all agree to use. And the depth of the plan by the end of that second year is the same depth you see on that wall right now, right? So it took us 2 years to get to that depth, to be able to make sure our plans were really high quality and shareable, and something we felt like could go on the internet and share with other people, but something that really pushed our students and also had great evidence of what we expected for kids to show us for learning in their content areas and their culminating projects.
So I'm just sort of slowly scrolling down one of those that is in your file from last year. This is a 9th grade robotics project. And what I'm struck by, and of course we call this the Deeper Learning Details series, but like, I mean, we're detailed down to the day. Like, this happens on this day. And here are videos that are like how we're going to get this project started. And here's the kickoff activity. You're clearly articulating when is this culminating event going to happen? What are the assessments that we're linking to? And then even down to this particular one has a rubric embedded. and how it is sort of linking to multiple different traditional domains, right? Algebra, geometry, physical world concepts, a science component, English, and history, and art. There you go. You had a great art teacher, by the way. I just wanted to hang out all day in your art. Anyway, so, I mean, just to get a sense of that, I mean, one of the things we want to do in deeper learning details is really show the detail, and that I'm sure has evolved over time. But so that this sort of product emerges in year 2. And
Yeah, by the end of year 2. Yep. So
And
as we
so-
go into year 3, that's when we began to post these items. And some nuances have happened, right? There's a corresponding pacing guide that goes with that one, right? So I don't know if you click on that, then you could see that even breaks down the tasks week to week, the expectations, right? So little things like that, those nuances adapted it. And in fact, that came from our kids, right? Our kids, we had we have something called the Senate at our school. It's made up of a group of kids that they make the school rules. They can take me on a whole other tangent, so I won't go there. But I will say, they said, hey, you know what would really help us is really breaking down these projects into what kind of tasks we need to complete each week, especially as we begin as 9th graders, right? We know that by the time we're 12th graders, the idea is for us to be able to break down these tasks into week by week goals and tasks for us to do. But as 9th graders, we don't know how to do that, right? So they actually put on a training with our teachers on what we've been given. Like they gave them a rubric and told them to do something, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, they're like, you're not proficient. You're not advanced. Your team's below basic because you didn't blah, blah, blah. And the teachers are like, what? They're like, but then they gave like one team a pacing guide. Like, hey, here's the task. Here's how you can break things down. And that team rocked it out. And they shared, this is what we gave to this team. And all the teachers were like, duh. Oh yeah. So we even had kids give PD to teachers that helped build some of the processes we have in place with PBL.
So in the comments and also in our series of questions anyway, was this role of teachers and how much ownership in this versus being sort of told, like, here is the pacing guide, you got to fill this out. Like, I mean, and given the level of detail, I could feel a lot of teachers feeling intimidated by that. And so talk a little bit about how that relationship unfolded and what happens like when a new teacher hits all this structure.
Yeah. So it goes back to the mission statement, just so you know, just early on, just quick tidbit. When we designed the school, we went to business, industry, and higher ed and asked for like, what do you want kids to be able to do? And we thought that they were going to tell us like physics, they got to have calculus, they got to like, we thought we were going to get like, they got to take AP, and we thought we were getting all this content stuff. And really what they told us had nothing to do with content. They told us things like, we want kids to be critical thinkers, be able to go on their own to research items, figure out what they need and apply those items. We want kids to be able to collaborators, kids that can work with other people, that work with people they like, work with people they don't like, bring their strengths, figure out where they're not so strong. Like we heard all this process stuff. So having said that, we call them our tenets of our school. And we have 3, it's collaboration, critical thinking, and innovation. And those 3 are embedded in all the decisions we make for the school. So in essence, we don't just expect that out of kids. We do that as a staff as well, right? So we know with innovation comes failure. So like we encourage our staff to try things and we know they're going to flop, right? Because we got to go through this iterative process to get them to where they need to be. So it's creating a school culture that values those processes, right? And if you do that, then things like PBL are things, but they're things within the schema of valuing innovation, collaboration, and critical thinking, right? So it's not just PBL in isolation, right? So every decision and everything we do in the school revolves around how do we make decisions that elevate innovation, critical thinking, and collaboration from the schedule to everything to do those things. So then it makes it, PBL just happens to be a type of learning structure that doesn't only elevate content, but does elevate innovation, critical thinking, collaboration, right? So if you were to pull up one of the 11th grade PBLs, you would see at that point, there's not even content listed on there, because at that point, kids began telling us, hey, stop telling us the type of content you want. We want to have the ownership of the content that we use to be able to solve the type of problems that business and community partners are giving us, because that's what we have by the time we get to 11th grade. And so we actually assess them in 11th grade on critical thinking, innovation, and collaboration. So there was a lot in there. I know I just threw like a whole at you, but in the sense, these process skills, whether you pick the 4 C's, even innovation, collaboration, critical thinking, whatever your process skills are that are important, if you make them important, not just for expectations of kids, but expectations of teachers, that helps to change the mindset of teachers as they go into this work. Like, it's not going to be perfect, and we're going to have to go through iterations of it to get it to go on the wall, right? It's not going to go on the wall first time we do it. It's going to take time to get to the wall. Does that make sense? Right? So we build in and bake in time to do that. We're very much about task-based professional development. So for instance, one of the walls you showed, it said mini PBL unit. That PBL unit you showed is a PBL that includes digital fabrication. Digital fabrication is basically using machines and computers to do the work for you. Like, you do the design, the machines do the work, right? It's turning bits into its, right? It's something that comes out of MIT. I encourage you to check that out. Fab Labs, check out that work. But here's the deal. We spent an entire school year with the teachers to go from, I don't have a PBL unit around digital fabrication, and we took the entire school year to create that unit. So everybody to get to the advanced level of creating a unit that could go on the wall. And our PD along the year is on this basis of what we call just in time. It's an engineering practice of it started with car manufacturing. Like, they stopped the whole assembly line and they said, there's a problem right now, so let's address it right now. Instead of saying, there might be a problem, or we're going to have everybody go through the same thing. So when we build, hey, the task is to create this unit. Here are all the items in the unit. As the year goes on, it's sort of like your driving questions need to be at this level at this point. And if they're not, then it's like, all right, now we're going to have some PD for some folks around the driving questions that are struggling, right? We go along the year, all of a sudden we have a couple of teachers that are stuck on scaffolding techniques. Like, I'm struggling with stations and focus groups. Like, how do all right, great. We're going to have a PD. We're going to have a help session at that point. So it's a task that we spend, and we don't ever shorten our time, but we make it lengthy, because nobody writes a great PBL unit the first time. My best teachers have never done that. They're always iterative process of writing it, other people reviewing it, crushing it, red marking it, the whole thing, like, until we get to the point that by the end of a school year, the ones you see on the wall, those teachers are so proud of those units. And then the next year, they are so excited to, like, they're getting all super giddy like kids. I can't wait until next year when I implement this with my kiddos.
So one thing that Justin and I were fascinated with your school is you're a lot different than a lot of schools who start off with a school and then want to sprinkle in PBL stuff. And you sort of started off with PBL and sprinkled in regular school stuff, like the content as you were talking about. So how is leading, like, with this level of PBL different for you as a leader? Like, what do you how is your job a lot different than a traditional principal, you think?
I'm a lot more, I guess, and I was a traditional high school principal for about 10 years. And in that setting, I did a lot of managing. And when in curricular pieces, I did a lot of things focused on very specific content. And my role has changed in a PBL to really being a person to help connect people together and to help be quality control, like to help folks know, hey, this is where we're at, but it's not where we're at where it's website worthy, let's say, right? Like there are pieces that we still need to improve on, and making that. So I'm working on improvement. And I felt like in my other role, it was very content focused. And though it was improvement, it was kind of like, here's a best practice. Let's use this best practice. If we use the best practice, we're going to be good, right? Where this is more like throw best practices out. That's not the focus. The focus is how do we iterate to make our PBLs high quality and implement them with fidelity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry,
So
taking my
we always want to ask, I mean, you know, you sat through an interview with us before. I mean, we're curious about things that didn't go well. I think there's always a lot of learning for groups like this, people that are trying to pursue it in things that didn't go that well. And so like what missteps happened along the way?
Yeah, right. So I talked a little bit about like, we now know there's an entry point into this PBL. So folks that come in, you talk about new people coming in. So this idea that they can just go from 0 to 100 is ludicrous, right? And especially if like they come to our school or we go to a school and somebody's been teaching a certain way for 10 years, right? Like teacher centered. You know, I'm at my podium, got my kids in my rows. Everybody's doing what I'm asking to do. Everybody's behaving. And now you want me to give up that control, right? So like what didn't go well was the expectation that we would just do this and the teachers would just get it. The teachers are more difficult to get the type of environment you want than the kids are, right? So the kids actually came quicker. And so that was a misstep on my part. Was I thought the whole focus was needing to train kids on how to do PBLs well. And what I did not as well as I wish I had was I should have spent more time realizing the teacher aspect of this transition was going to be the bigger lift. Right.
Do you still find that? One of the questions in the chat from Nikki was, do teachers know what they're getting into? And like, I'm wondering if even for teachers now who know, I mean, it's pretty clear who you are, as they enter, are they still clear, or is there still a lot of learning right away?
Oh, there's tons. The first, like any teacher that comes to us, right? So we have a new chemistry teacher this year, last year, new Spanish teacher, like anybody that comes to just those two as examples. We all know everybody on staff, and I'd say you have no idea where you've come to right now. We are not going to talk about a lot of things with you. We're going to have you go through things, and you might be on a team that's doing a PBL and they'll be walking you through, but you don't even know what to ask. You think you might know, but you don't know. So I'm going to be patient. You're going to have this first year where you're just going to be like, every week, you're going to feel like, I've never seen this before. I've never seen this before. And so we have this, sort of this gradual learning of, there's a little bit in the first year where it's gain experience and we know there's going to be some gaps and some failures with that teacher. And we just encourage them and tell them that's when it happens, it's okay. And by the end of the year, we begin talking about items with them, and they're like, I've experienced that. Oh, and we begin to have the unpack. So the second year is sort of the time when we begin really diving more into training with them. I know it sounds antithetical, right? To be like, you don't train them in the first year. They're getting trained through experience in the first year, right? Of the way we do school. And I can't just train them up because they don't even know the questions to ask. And then in the second year, that's when we really begin to dive deeper with those teachers at our school. And it takes a third year. By the third year, they're finally like, I think I have a handle on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So when we hire teachers now, it's really about walking them through, are you ready to go through a process where you're going to feel like a first year teacher again? And then it's going to take us some time to get you to where you need to be. It's going to take us, it'll be your third year here that you'll be like, I finally have wrapped my head around this thing. And so from a leadership standpoint, like I know I've had some hires that are like, oh, that hire you got, that's going to be the best teacher you've ever hired. That teacher's amazing. That teacher's incredible. First year with us, still no idea, right? So that's kind of our process. We know what happens when somebody comes to our school.
Then we won't have a chance to get into it now. Tony, you also have a really robust system for training these teachers and monitoring them and feedback, right? So it's not willy-nilly. You all have it dialed in there too.
Yeah. So it's really right. So let's focus on PBL, right? So PBL, we know we really want to start people with this idea of what's called, like I mentioned before, SOUL, self-organized learning environment. So we have a 3-day PBL training, and the first day is almost all about SOUL. And that SOUL is like, you can go in, it's a one classroom setting. And I think SOLE.org. You can go to that website, and it's got some great videos in there. And it's basically about making a driving question and turning kids loose, right? And then having a product at the end of that lesson. And it's completely different from a teacher-centered classroom. And so that's where we start, so that folks begin to learn about, how do I make this environment where I'm giving control to kids and I'm facilitating learning instead of dispensing information. And that's a really huge transition for teachers. And so that's where we start. And then from there, we go to what we call a mini PBL. And we call it mini PBL because we call it a single content area PBL. Mm-hmm. So it's not about thinking about other content areas. It's just about your content. So if you're a math teacher, your standards, right? And then developing your mini PBL that could be two weeks, maybe 3 weeks in length, that has, how do I pace this thing? How do I create a driving question that's meaningful? What kind of product am I looking for? Do I do quizzes in between to do some other assessments before I get to my final product? So like we call it mini PBL. And then eventually, sort of the culminating big idea is actually where we started when we started the school, which is, now let's get you to understand what it means to have an interdisciplinary PBL. So talk about things where we didn't know we didn't even know. You know, we dove in the deep end. We didn't know we were in the deep end. But now looking back, we're like, we can't believe we jumped in the deep end. If we could start the school over, we would be doing SOLs. Then we would have been doing mini PBLs. Then we would have been doing interdisciplinary PBLs.
All right. So then I guess last question from us, even though I do want to, do you have a PBL director?
Nope. No PBL director.
It's not So there's not a specific like leadership layer whose responsibility is X, PBL. It is shared leadership, both at the leadership level. There's an assistant principal, I think I remember, and then teachers. So there's no other person. So I was curious about leadership team and how you form that up. But
Yeah, so
not-
we, again, everything is a task, right? And depends what team you're on. So for instance, you could be on a 10th grade team, and the task could be an interdisciplinary PBL unit that is working with the Creative Discovery Museum, which is a local children's museum, to help build math and science lesson plans for elementary school kids. And so the task is to be able to create a unit where our students, by the end of the unit, have created math and science standard lessons that they can teach to elementary school children, right? And so if you're on that team, then there is no like expert, like it's about collective efficacy, right? But there still is like, I might look over the PBL, right, to give feedback, or another grade level teacher might look at the PBL, or a business partner. Like we might look at it from different points, but there's no like PBL curriculum director that's like, it's got to go through that person and they're leading it. No, it's we agree on the task, and then that task, we agree what team members have got to accomplish the task.
Awesome. All right. So then what's the one piece of advice for leaders all over the North America here that are off into leading for PBL? What's that one piece of advice you'd want to put out there? And then for other folks, get those questions ready. We're turning it to you next.
Gotcha. So I would just say, figure out where your folks are on the spectrum of PBL understanding. And if they are like a novice, right, realize that they have to learn how to set up their classroom environment before even trying to create PBL units, because it's a whole different environment. So I would say focus on starting them with soul, right? Something that they can wrap their heads around to see some success, to learn how to do their environment. If they're like, no, man, I want to do PBL a minute, blah, blah, would be connecting them with others and having them go through a process of iteration on their planning, like a really fine-tuning, crushing the work that they're doing in a good way, so that at the end of it, there's a product that they're really proud of and really excited to implement. So that would be my take on PBL. Awesome.
Okay, thanks. You have exhausted our questions, and so the room has some questions for you. I'll open it up. The question you just posted, Becky, though, is a great details question. And so if you want to throw that one into space, that really fits the details we're trying to get to.
Sure. I put it in the chat. I just wondered what processes you all use to revisit or reimagine, refresh, whatever you want to use your units over time. Is it like an annual thing? Are kids involved in any way with sort of evaluating how it went and where it might want to go from there?
Yeah, so all of that, right? So we have no set procedure, as much as we do, like if we have a 9th grade unit, at the end of the unit, there might be a 9th grade teacher that's like, you know what, we did this unit, but I think I've got an idea that would be better than this unit, pitches it to the rest of the team. And we could be like, great, we'll scrap that one. Let's start a new one. Let's do that. Let's do your idea next year. It's open to anybody. We have kids that come and are like, well, why do we do this? How about, can we do something around this? Probably can. Bring it to the team that would be associated with it, pitch the idea. And so it's just it's like a constant, there is no timeline. There is no, like, you can't do it. It's constant. Anybody at any time sort of comes with ideas. And then the way we do the PBLs is, this is a really important piece of our school. we figured out pretty early on, by like year 3, we needed to ramp up the PBLs as as we went up each grade level. So the way we ramp it up is in the 9th grade level, it's tied to 5 content areas, but the ideas are all created in-house. For instance, this year, for the first time in the first quarter, we did a pinball machine last year. This year, we decided to do a foosball table. So the kids actually digitally fabricated a foosball table. We made this whole unit around it. And one of the reason it came up is somebody had this idea because on the pinball machines, the flippers weren't working great. And they thought the mechanisms on a foosball table would be easier to actually produce and to fabricate and manufacture for the kids to be able to have really quality tables. So like that idea came up, but we create those sort of like in-house. Somebody comes up with an idea. 10th grade, we find a business or community partner that partners with us to come up with the idea. So for instance, we use the Hunter Museum, local art museum, and we've done this project for about the past 6 years. And it's just turns out great. It's digitally fabricating an innovative piece of art based off an original art piece. And then the kids act as docents at the art museum for their showcase night. But so that's a content, there's 5 content areas in that one, business partner. But then in 11th grade year, the kids started telling us early on they wanted more choice and voice. And so we have every year we have about 25 to 30 community or business partners that come in and they pitch the problem at the kids. So like we had a elementary school kid that's in a wheelchair and his mom contacted the school and they're like, is there any way you guys can do a project around making a Halloween costume for him? Right. So that was a business partner project, and kids could pick that project to work on for that student. They were assessed not on content, but on innovation, critical thinking, collaboration. And so in 11th grade, there's about 25 to 30 different projects over the course of the year that you can pick from and your team chooses. And so it gives you a lot of choice and voice, but it's also a community or business partner that you're creating a project or product for. And we have some really technical ones that come up. Like we had a company that wanted our kids to create these sensors. It was a transportation company, all sorts of coding going along in it, but all sorts of different things. And then in 12th grade, we say, no longer do we want to tell you the problem. And so our kids actually go through the Stanford D School process, and they actually start with empathy, and they around a STEM area of interest to them, and they create their own, they define a problem that's really meaningful in the world that hasn't been solved. They create their own product or service to address that problem. They build a business around it, and they pitch that in an entrepreneurship competition in their senior year. So all that to say, throughout the first 3 years, those projects can change, they can stay. There's no timeline. Every year, 11th grade, those projects change out a ton. The only thing that probably hasn't changed is our 12th grade one continues to stay. We don't want to tell you what to do. We want you to create a project that is meaningful to you, that positively impacts the world.
Thank you. Jennifer, you want to jump in? You had a great one earlier about parent resistance. I don't know if that's
Sure.
where
Yeah, and this might be me just still carrying some baggage from South America, but I ran a PBL school in Colombia, and I found it was, I agree with you that teachers had a harder time than students, but I also found that parents had a harder time than teachers, and that they got really impatient with that growth process from the teachers. In other words, that they would, why should I put up with a teacher who's only been doing this for a few months? They clearly don't know what they're doing. And now I know enough about PBL that you should be able to do this better than you can. So I'm curious how you've handled any form of parent resistance, if you've had it along the way.
Yeah, had parent resistance. The difference is, and I learned this from my old school to this school, was at my old school, we spent a lot of time trying to solve the issues without the kids. Does that make sense? Like the parent and the adults in the building trying to fix the problem. And so what we transitioned to here early on was we don't have any of those conversations without the kid. Like we put the kid involved in the process, and we really focus on, like, I'll have conversations with parents. I'll be like, you can email me and you can complain, but I'm going to email you back and I'm going to say, send little Johnny to school tomorrow, and you can write, you can coach him up, whatever you want, so that little Johnny can advocate and communicate that to us. And then we'll take little Johnny and work with little Johnny to help solve, like, we want Johnny's got to be part of the solution process. And we've had, for the most part, that is taken care of 98% of the issues, because it's put the kid in the center. And then our teachers actually adapt more when kids are advocating than they do when the parents advocating. Does that make any sense? Like, they get their kind of like their back against the wall when it's a parent, but it could be the exact same issue. But if a kid comes and it's like, all right, this is what I'm struggling with, can I get help on it? Like, they're like, oh, okay. Like they enjoy seeing the kids do that. So that's been our mantra and our paradigm shift. That's been helpful. Not perfect, but helpful.
And Tony does a great job of putting students first. When we first walked into STEM Chattanooga, he said, "Here's," I can remember the kid's name, but here's Johnny. He'll be with you for the day. Come back at the end of the day if you have any questions." And he just walked away. So we spent the whole day with the kids telling us about their learning. They were directing all the questions for the teachers. It was pretty awesome how you all did that.
Yeah, our whole goal is to put the student at the center, which is at the heart of PBL, right? And so it's not just PBLs, but it's people coming to tour the school. It's parents got a problem. Let's get the kids got it. We're involving the kid, right? Like, obviously there's some problems you can't involve the kid on, right? But 99% of the time, the kid needs to be involved, and that's what we do, and put them at the center.
Okay, what else, folks, do you want to throw at Tony while we got only about 3 minutes left?
So that really answers my question of where kids land in the question of assessment and if they're involved in those practices. And so it sounds like there are. And I was just curious about things beyond exhibition that you've come up with in student generated rubrics or self-assessments, or how much does that go into the assessment?
So Justin and Jason could probably tell you, we could probably do a whole other session just on how we do grading. Yeah, so the kids, we do standards-based grading model where the kids are in control. I know that basically these rubrics are given to students right at the beginning of projects. We do a rubric for everything we do. There's no guesswork. And so kids can literally self-assess their work. And when something is done, like a due date, and it hits, that's not even the end of it. We have opportunities for them to go back and iterate on their own work to improve it later. So nothing's ever one and done. So it really puts the kid at the center of owning their learning. And for a lot of high school kids, it's kind of like grades have always happened to them. And so we've transitioned it completely where literally the kid is in control of the grades, which also helps with all our parent issues, right? Parents like, hey, my kid didn't learn. Well, your kid can do X, Y, Z. They can go meet with the teacher. They can advocate. We have a time where they can do that every day. So the kid literally can make the parents are like, so my kid can fix that? Yep. Okay, I think I'll hang up the phone now and go talk to my kid. Yep, go do that. Go talk to your kid and tell them come in tomorrow. And we'll work on advocating for themselves to be able to improve on where they stand.
And there are some example assessments. I quickly shared a rubric that would be one of those assessment rubrics, and I'm sure there's even more. But again, I mean, thank you all for being so transparent with those details. It is like, it takes that level of detail to really pull this off for real. And so you being willing to share as deeply as you have around all the different PBL practices, including some of the missteps along the way, I think is great for all of us. As you said, like the STEM school of Chattanooga is not slowing down. Since we were there a year and a half or 2 years ago, there's a whole new building behind him. And so big robotics fab lab that happens to have robotics in it. Kindergarten through 14 are using that fab lab. The fab lab movement that you've been a part of is something worth investigating on it at another time.
Yeah.
But there are many powerful practices that you all have explored. And I think one of the things that a district that might be listening to this can find while you're a startup school, and there's a little bit of startup money from Battelle in there, right? And you all have been great about applying for grants to do stuff like that building behind you. If I can visualize myself as a district doing all of this. This is not like the new tech story, the high tech high story, and these like unapproachable things. Many states have the STEM learning networks. Like you said, Ohio has one, Tennessee has one. At this point, there's probably about 10 of those different networks across the country. And so there are entry points you can connect to get this work started. And then what it takes is spectacular leadership, teachers that are willing to just go along for the ride. And, X number of years later, you're a national model sitting on interviews like this.
Well, just so you know, every year is another iteration, right? So don't think like Justin was saying, you talked to me 2 years ago, you'd be like, oh, they got, well, look at this cool. 2 years later, we're like, yeah, we've scrapped some of these things and we've gone this way, and this, like, it's a constant iteration.
Well, thank you so much for joining tonight. Up next, for those in the room and listening, is a deep dive into student ownership of learning. In fact, straight up student ownership of the entire school operation, including the tax returns. And so that is next Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, if you want to join in, and we'll dive deep with Chad, who helped to found One Stone in Boise, Idaho. All right, thank you all for joining.
Thank you all. It's been awesome. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you so much, everybody.